The Chicago Bears are sitting at the top of the NFC, and almost nobody outside that locker room saw this coming. One moment they were the team everyone doubted, the next they are staring down at every other contender in the conference with the #1 seed within reach. This is not some feel-good story that fades when the schedule gets tough. This is real, and it is happening right now. The road to home field advantage in the playoffs runs straight through their hands, but there is one massive obstacle standing in the way. This Sunday, all of that momentum walks directly into Lambeau Field in freezing conditions, where Green Bay is waiting to either validate everything Chicago has built or expose them as pretenders. If the Bears leave that stadium with a win, the entire narrative of this season changes overnight. If they stumble, every hungry team in the NFC suddenly smells blood and starts circling. This is not just another rivalry game where fans get loud and the media makes it dramatic for clicks. This matchup will decide how the rest of the NFC North feels for the next few years. For too long, Green Bay has owned this division when the stakes were highest, controlling the biggest moments and making Chicago chase from behind. But this Bears team looks different, plays different, and feels different. They have a punishing run game that wears defenses down, a coaching staff that knows how to attack weaknesses, and a defense that has stopped just hanging on and started punching back. Add in the brutal weather, the 10 to 15 degree temperatures, the wind chill that cuts straight through pads, and you get the kind of game where offensive linemen, my running backs and linebackers, matter more than any storyline anyone wrote before kickoff. This is old school NFC North football at its coldest and most unforgiving. The crazy part is that none of this confidence came out of thin air. It all started when Chicago walked into Philadelphia and physically dominated the Eagles for 4 full quarters, running the ball at will and making life miserable for Jalen Hurts while proving they could win on a big stage. That night is where this version of the Bears was truly born, with backs like DeAndre Swift and Kyle Monangai turning simple handoffs into body blows that never stopped landing. To really understand why this team now believes it can march into Lambeau and take control, you have to rewind to that performance in Philly and break down exactly how they took over that game from the very first drive. But before we jump into that, hit that like and subscribe button for more Bears and all the NFL content. Let's aim for 100 likes on this video. The Chicago Bears did not stumble into this position by accident or luck. This roster was constructed with a specific identity in mind, and every piece fits together to create something the NFC has not seen from this franchise in years. The formula is simple but brutal. Pound the football on the ground until defenses break, let an aggressive coaching staff attack every weakness they find, and trust a defense that has learned to hit back instead of just absorbing punishment. When you watch this team play, you are not seeing a collection of talented individuals hoping things click. You are watching a machine that knows exactly what it wants to do and has the personnel to execute it over and over until opponents wear down. That kind of clarity is rare, and it becomes even more dangerous when the weather turns hostile and the margin for error shrinks. The conditions this Sunday at Lambeau Field are going to be absolutely miserable, with temperatures sitting between 10 and 15 degrees and wind chill dropping into single digits. Most teams would look at that forecast and worry about their game plan falling apart. The Bears look at it and see an advantage. This is the kind of weather that favors physical football, where offensive linemen can fire off the ball and create movement, where running backs like DeAndre Swift and Kyle Monangai can lean into contact and grind out yards, and where linebackers can swarm to the football without worrying about getting beat in space. The cold makes everything harder, but it makes finesse football almost impossible. When the field gets hard and slippery, when hands go numb and breath comes out in clouds, the team that can line up and physically dominate at the line of scrimmage is the team that survives. Chicago has built their entire roster around that concept, and now they get to prove it in the exact environment where their style of play thrives. What makes this different from past Bears teams is the psychological shift that comes with proven results. For too long, Chicago was the team that looked tough on paper but folded when the moment got too big or the opponent too talented. This group has already walked into hostile environments and taken what they wanted. They have already faced elite defenses and still moved the chains. The confidence is not based on hope or potential anymore. It is based on film, on results, on knowing that when Green Bay tries to stop the run, Chicago has the blockers and the backs to keep hammering away until something breaks. That belief changes everything, and it all traces back to one statement performance that announced to the entire league that this version of the Bears was not going to be pushed around anymore. The Chicago Bears walked into Philadelphia expecting a test, but instead they delivered a masterclass in physical dominance that caught the entire league off guard. This was not a game where they scraped by with a lucky bounce or a late field goal. This was 4 quarters of controlled violence where Chicago imposed their will on an Eagles defense that had been making life difficult for offenses all season. The crowd was electric, the primetime lights were glaring, and Jalen Hurts had weapons all over the field ready to explode. None of it mattered. From the opening drive, the Bears came out running the football with purpose, and they never stopped. Both DeAndre Swift and Kyle Monangai crossed the 100-yard mark on the ground, combining for over 250 rushing yards that left Philadelphia's front seven looking exhausted and frustrated by the final whistle. This was the night where Chicago proved their identity was not just a theory, it was a weapon. What made that performance so devastating was how every single piece of the offense worked together in perfect harmony. The offensive line was firing off the ball with aggression, creating space at the first level that allowed Swift to bounce outside and cut back into open grass, while Monangai slammed downhill and dragged tacklers for extra yards after contact. You could see the synchronization, the way blockers and ball carriers were reading the same picture and executing the same plan without hesitation. Meanwhile, Caleb Williams played exactly the kind of game this team needs from their quarterback. He was not trying to be a hero or force throws into tight windows. He got the ball out on time, hit Cole Kmet and DJ Moore on simple but effective routes, picked his spots to attack down the field, and never let the moment or the pressure rush his decision-making. That balance between the ground assault and smart passing is why the Eagles' defense could never truly dictate terms, even with all their talent and scheme versatility staring them in the face. On the other side of the ball, Chicago made Jalen Hurts uncomfortable in ways that few defenses have managed this season. He had A.J. Brown running routes, he had protection holding up for the most part, and yet snap after snap you could see him hesitating, double clutching, drifting in the pocket instead of stepping up and firing. The Bears were not just rushing him with blitzes or dropping everyone into coverage. They were mixing looks, changing the picture post snap, and forcing him to process too much information too quickly. By keeping him off balance mentally, they took away the rhythm and confidence that makes him so dangerous. But here is the catch. Winning that game in Philadelphia came at a real cost, and not just on the scoreboard. Big bodies like Andrew Billings and Gervin Dexter were battling inside on every single snap, absorbing contact and fighting through blocks. Corners like Jalen Johnson and Kyler Gordon had to chase receivers in space and make tackles in the open field. By the time the clock hit 0, you could see the toll it took. Now those same players have to turn around in a short week and get ready for another brutal war in freezing temperatures at Lambeau Field. And the injury report tells a story that could change everything about how this game plays out. The Chicago Bears are chasing the #1 seed while simultaneously fighting a battle that does not show up on highlight reels or in post-game interviews. They are fighting to keep their best players healthy and functional in conditions that punish every sore muscle and tired joint. Every new injury report feels like a referendum on whether this team can actually survive the gauntlet ahead. Names slide between limited participation, did not practice, and full participant while the temperature around Lambeau sits frozen near 10 degrees with wind that cuts through equipment like it is not even there. This is the kind of environment where bodies ache before kickoff even begins, and fans scanning that injury list are asking one critical question. Who is actually going to be ready to hit at full speed for 4 complete quarters when every snap feels twice as hard as it would in normal conditions? At the center of that question stands TJ Edwards, who has been working his way back into practice with limited participation, and would provide a massive boost to the middle of the defense if he can suit up. His instincts for reading gaps and his tackling ability are exactly what Chicago needs when a power back like Josh Jacobs is looking to pound the ball between the tackles over and over. The Bears also received encouraging signs from Jalen Johnson, who came back from groin surgery and handled his first game back without any setbacks before logging full practice sessions this week. Noah Sewell has moved past the elbow issue that kept him sidelined and can now rotate in at linebacker to provide fresh legs. Behind them, players like DeMarco Jackson and Amen Ogbongbemiga have stepped up and held things together during recent weeks when the depth was tested. If those guys can stay on the field with Edwards returning to the lineup, Chicago suddenly has real options and flexibility in the second level instead of patching holes and hoping nobody notices the cracks. On the offensive side, the picture is similar but not perfect. Rome Odunze keeps appearing on the injury report with that nagging foot and ankle problem, yet he has been grinding through it for weeks, and the expectation is that he will be out there again. Kyle Monangai has been carefully managed early in practice week so that his legs stay powerful and explosive when game day arrives. And his physical running style becomes even more critical when the field turns hard and defenders struggle to wrap up. In the secondary, Tyreek Stevenson and his hip issue remain a concern that the coaching staff is monitoring closely. Ruben Hippolyte is also nursing a shoulder problem that has limited his availability. Add in pieces like Dominique Robinson and Andrew Billings working their way back from concussion protocol, and you can see why the training staff is trying to squeeze every healthy snap possible from the roster. The Bears are patching themselves together for a frozen war at Lambeau, but the twist that nobody is talking about enough is that Green Bay has its own lengthy injury list. And some of those absences could quietly tilt this entire matchup before the opening kickoff even happens. Green Bay walks into this matchup carrying more damage than most people realize, and it starts in the one place you never want to see your roster thin out: the defensive line. Devontae Wyatt looks like a serious long-term problem that could keep him off the field entirely, and Lucas Van Ness has already been spotted wearing a boot, which is never a good sign heading into a game where trench warfare will decide the outcome. Depth pieces like Savion Williams are not locked in either, leaving the Packers scrambling to fill gaps. They even had to bring in Jordan Riley from another team just to add an extra big body inside. Which tells you everything about how nervous the coaching staff is about surviving 4 quarters against a physical rushing attack. In a freezing game where every snap feels heavier on tired legs and sore muscles, having question marks across your entire defensive front is the kind of quiet disaster that can unravel a game plan before halftime. Behind that compromised line, the list of players dealing with something just keeps growing, and every name on that report changes how Green Bay can call their defense. Josh Jacobs is managing his own issue while still being expected to carry a huge workload on offense, which puts even more pressure on a defense that might not be able to get off the field. On the perimeter and at the second level, you see names like Matthew Golden, Dontavion Wicks, Zach Tom, Carl Brooks, Javon Bullard. Edgerrin Cooper, Nate Hobbs, Barron Sorrell, and Key Walker all showing up as limited in practice. That designation usually means they can suit up, but they are not going to be at full strength for extended stretches. Then you add the practice window group trying to work their way back. Marshawn Lloyd is dealing with a calf injury, Jaden Reed is trying to ramp up his conditioning, and Colin Oliver and Brenton Cox are hoping to be activated just to provide some depth. On paper, it looks like plenty of options, but in real time, it often turns into a rotation of tough guys who can play but do not quite have their normal burst or explosiveness when the ball is snapped. That is where this matchup gets truly interesting for Chicago. Because a defense held together with duct tape and hope is the exact kind of unit that hates facing a run-heavy attack for 4 full quarters. A front that already lost Devontae Wyatt might be without Lucas Van Ness, and has to lean on emergency additions like Jordan Riley is going to feel every single block from the Bears' offensive line. When linebackers like Key Walker are forced to make tackle after tackle in the cold, and when young defensive backs such as Nate Hobbs have to come up and stop the run again and again, cracks start to show in the third and fourth quarters. The real question now is simple. How does Chicago's offensive coordinator design the ground game to keep attacking those vulnerable spots until something finally gives? And how do the running backs turn that blueprint into another long night for a defense that is already running on fumes? The Chicago Bears did not stumble into this devastating rushing attack by chance or raw talent alone. This system was constructed piece by piece with a very clear philosophy in mind: and the architect behind it all understood exactly what he wanted to build. When you break down the tape, the plays might appear straightforward at first glance. Hand the ball to DeAndre Swift or Kyle Monangai and let them work. But the reality is far more complex for defenders trying to stop it. You see motion cutting across the formation before the snap, tight ends sliding into the backfield from unexpected angles, offensive linemen stepping one direction while the ball carrier threatens a completely different lane. Defenders are forced to process information, make split-second decisions, and react. But by the time they figure out where the ball is actually going, the running back is already hitting the hole at full speed. That constant mental stress is what transforms basic zone concepts into something that feels impossible to solve over the course of a full game. To make that vision come to life, Chicago rebuilt the heart of their offensive line with players who fit this exact style of attacking football. Joe Thuney brings veteran control and technical footwork that allows him to reach defenders and seal running lanes. Jonah Jackson sets the tone as a physical presence who moves people backward in the run game and creates push at the point of attack. Drew Dalman anchors everything from the center position with his ability to reach block at the second level and climb to linebackers without losing his balance or leverage. On the right side, Darnell Wright has developed into a legitimate force, sealing the edge on outside runs and washing defensive ends down the line to open cutback lanes. Ozzie Trapilo on the left side is still settling into his role, but learning how to use his length effectively in space. Then you add tight ends like Cole Kmet and Durham Smythe, who act as extra blockers from varying alignments, sometimes lined up at the line of scrimmage, sometimes motioning into the backfield like a fullback. The defense never gets the same look twice, and the job for the running backs is to trust those blocks, read the creases as they develop, and hit the opening before anyone can recover. The result of all that design and execution shows up in the numbers that matter most, particularly on early downs where games are truly won and lost. Last season, the Bears were buried near the bottom of the league in rushing yards on first and second down, which created long third down situations, obvious passing scenarios, and extra pressure on Caleb Williams to make plays in difficult circumstances. This year, they are generating approximately 135 rushing yards per game on those early downs, which ranks as the best mark in all of football. That transformation changes the entire complexion of the offense. Now 2nd and 6 feels routine, 3rd and 2 becomes common, and play action actually scares defenses because they have already been gashed repeatedly on the ground. It creates the perfect stage for a featured back to dominate. And nobody has taken better advantage of this system than the player who was written off by many just months ago, but is now rewriting his entire career trajectory in Chicago. The wildest part of this Chicago Bears surge is that their most explosive weapon on offense is a player many people were ready to give up on not long ago. DeAndre Swift went from being the guy everyone questioned to the one named defensive circle on their game plan, and then he still finds ways to make them look foolish when the ball is in his hands. Against Philadelphia, he did not just compile impressive numbers in the box score. He looked like he controlled the entire tempo and rhythm of that game, cutting through lanes, gliding past arm tackles, and finishing runs strong while the Eagles' front seven visibly wore down as the night went on. In a league full of flashy moments and viral highlights, this feels like something different. A veteran back rewriting his entire narrative right as Chicago is fighting for the top seed in the conference, proving that talent never really disappears, it just needs the right system and the right moment to shine again. What makes this version of DeAndre Swift so dangerous is not just his speed or athleticism. It is how he sees the field and processes information within this offense. Last year, he sat under the mark of 4 yards per carry, and there were legitimate conversations about moving on from him entirely and finding a replacement. This year, he is reading blocks with patience, waiting for the right moment, then exploding through creases the instant they appear. That is how you end up averaging around 7 yards per carry on the road against a strong Eagles front that had been shutting down other offenses. When the play design flows outside, he has the burst and acceleration to turn the corner before linebackers can string it out. When the lane opens up inside, he plants his foot and gets vertical before defenders can square up and make a clean tackle. Pair that explosiveness with the way Kyle Monangai leans through contact and keeps drives alive with his physical style, and you suddenly have a backfield that feels like a constant assault on the defense rather than a boom or bust approach that only produces occasional big plays. The next layer of this story is what Swift's rise means for everything else around him on this roster. As long as he keeps running with this kind of efficiency and production, Chicago does not need Caleb Williams to play hero ball or force throws into tight coverage. They can let him manage the game, pick his spots intelligently, and let the ground attack do the heavy lifting while keeping the clock moving and the defense rested. It also gives the front office genuine decisions to make moving forward, because a player who once looked like a potential salary cap cut now feels like someone worth keeping in the building when you start thinking about next season. Most importantly, every time DeAndre Swift and Kyle Monangai force safeties to creep closer to the line of scrimmage, they make life significantly easier for the other side of the ball. The Bears defense now gets to attack quarterbacks like Jalen Hurts and Jordan Love from a position of strength, with leads to protect and favorable down and distance situations. And the way the defensive coordinator has been mixing pressure packages and coverage looks is starting to feel like its own nightmare for the rest of the NFC to solve. The Chicago Bears are sitting in a position that used to feel like a fantasy for this franchise, perched on top of the NFC with every other contender staring up at them and waiting for a crack to appear. One slip and they tumble back into the pack where 5 or 6 teams are separated by a single game. One strong finish and they lock in home field advantage all the way through January, hosting playoff games at Soldier Field while other teams freeze and struggle in hostile territory. The path ahead is not forgiving. Trips to Green Bay and San Francisco loom large, a home game against the Cleveland Browns that cannot be overlooked, another showdown with the Packers later in the schedule, and a late-season collision with the Detroit Lions that could decide the division outright. If Chicago emerges from that gauntlet with 12 or 13 wins on their record, nobody can dismiss them as a surprise team anymore. They become the standard that everyone else has to measure themselves against. What makes this race so fascinating is how many advantages are already tilting in Chicago's favor even before those brutal final weeks arrive. They already own the head-to-head tiebreaker over the Philadelphia Eagles after what they did to Jalen Hurts and that offense in primetime. They have a cleaner conference record than teams like the Los Angeles Rams and Seattle Seahawks, which matters when tiebreakers start getting applied at the end of the season. They still get direct matchups against the San Francisco 49ers and Green Bay Packers, which means they control their own destiny rather than needing help from other results around the league. If they split or sweep Green Bay, they tighten their grip on the NFC North and push Jordan Love into a chase he cannot control, no matter how well he plays. If they beat San Francisco, they close off another legitimate path for a late surge from a healthy Niners squad that always seems to peak in December and January. Meanwhile, teams like the Dallas Cowboys, Tampa Bay Buccaneers, Detroit Lions, Seattle Seahawks, and even wildcard hopefuls like the Carolina Panthers are fighting their own desperate battles just to stay within striking distance. Every time one of those squads loses a close game or drops a division matchup, the Bears gain more breathing room and more margin for error. The real excitement starts when you picture how this all looks once the playoff bracket is finally set, and Soldier Field becomes the place everyone has to visit if they want to reach the Super Bowl. Imagine a cold night in Chicago where a team like Carolina or Tampa Bay has to bring their entire season into a windy winter environment and deal with a rested defense that has been sitting at home for a week. They have to face a fresh ground attack led by DeAndre Swift pounding away at tired defenders, while Caleb Williams picks his spots in front of a home crowd that finally believes this team is legitimate. Some fans will dream about drawing the easiest possible first-round opponent, hoping for a smooth path to the divisional round. Others will want a shot at a big name right away to prove that this rise is not smoke and mirrors, but the real thing. Either way, the question hanging over the entire conference remains the same. If the Bears keep stacking wins and stay locked into that number 1 slot, which contender actually wants to walk into their house in January and try to take it away from them?